This is the slide I was supposed to be showing, but we'll start in about 30 seconds or so. See if someone else joins. All right. Those are the 3 academic minutes because society is speeding up. So are we. No 15, no more 15. Um, Welcome to this, workshop or a little sort of thought provoker or a little, thought nugget maybe rather than workshop to be concrete about the RCO. That's what we'll be focusing on. This is the fourth installment in our journey into what we call the regenerative business transformation, where we're looking at different aspects of what it could entail to be regenerative business. And for 3 sessions, we've been kind of staying with the trouble. We've been looking at personal aspects of what the transformation could mean or could be. We're looking at systemic transformations. We've been looking at relational aspects of the transformation. That's what I was supposed to say. Systemic aspects of the transformation. And today we've come to talk about the RCO. And the RCO, I think, to set expectations, is a toolbox. So we've formulated in a very particular way for our purposes, and we are currently reformulating this toolbox to fit other founders and other founders' purposes as well. So this is a suggestion. It's quite modular. It's quite wide, but we're going to stay with some of the basics of the RCO today. So let's see if I'm allowed to switch slides. Innrwrks, who's hosting these, is a transformation lab and studio for regenerative business. And we do 3 things. And I'm going to start from the... Oh, I'm going to mute you, Maria. I'm going to start from the right here. We consult, we build ventures, and we build tools. And the tools are things we do mostly for learning, but sometimes they become really useful, like the RCO. So we're going to be hanging out in that toolbox today. The guiding question that we are very much focused on is, how can we transform business to create the world we want our kids to live in? So that's kind of the red thread, the thing that connects all of the different activities that we are involved with. What would be really lovely, just to hear from you, is if you would kind of put in the chat as a super short check-in what emotion is dominating in you right now. What emotion is dominating in you right now, and where are you calling in from? So a place, as specific or unspecific as you like, a place and an emotion in the chat, just as a very brief check-in before we move into the next step. Determination, that's juicy. Lovely. I'll let that happen. Oh, hope and inspiration from India. Sounds nice. Little tumult. All right. Yeah, enjoy your lunch, Philip. Uh, yeah. Thanks for bringing that in, Graham. All right. Um, Before we get into the little nooks and crannies of the RCO, I wanted to send you out into a very short 3 minute breakout room so that you get to reflect with someone else. And I'd propose that there's going to be one breakout room with three, I see. Or maybe not actually. Nils, if you don't join the breakout room, then it will sort out. Just to reflect on this question: what do you imagine business could be in a thriving world? What do you imagine that business could be in a thriving world? Or what would you like it to be right now? So just to kind of connect with that imaginal and connect with the potentiality of what business holds. So I'm going to send you out. I'm going to call you back in about 3 minutes. So it's very short, but make sure that both of you get to speak. So be brief and have exchanges and enjoy. We'll see you back here in about 3 or 4 minutes. Yep. Good. All right. Let's see. Yes. Okay. You're all back. That's good. It wasn't as obvious because I was in a different screen. Let's see. Um, Lovely. So hopefully that did something to spark your imagination. I'm going to kind of lead us on into the nooks and crannies and the labyrinths of the RCO. And one of those starting points that we've been having with this organizational design is what if companies are actually living systems? What if companies are actually living systems? I think from our perspective, companies is some of the most powerful technology that humans have ever invented. Let's say that the limited company or some version of it was emerged a few hundred years ago when we started doing really big expeditions to go and extract the world, if you will, back in Italy somewhere, and it was a way for us to come together to coordinate resources in a way, and as we see these emerging things arriving, as we see these companies sort of take shape and being very successful in acquiring resources and doing something, executing on projects. And fast forward a few hundred years, and we have, I haven't looked again, but I think it's at least a couple, maybe a few even companies on are the largest entities in the world, bigger than countries in terms of market cap versus GDP. So this invention of companies, invention of this legal innovation really did something to us. And some have argued that we live in the age of corporatism, that corporates run everything. And a lot of this, of course, came up during a period of time when we were inventing sort of the thermodynamic or like the mechanical, the Newtonian physics. And so that's also reflected in the company structures. People that are in the regenerative movement often talk about that separation is one of those key. Our idea or the perception that we are separate from the entire universe is a very core at the predicament that we find ourselves in. And so the RCO for us is a point and an attempt to start putting ourselves back into relationship with the whole and start considering companies as living systems, because they actually do compare. Like, the most important parts of companies are alive. So I'm going to go through the 3 parts of the RCO. There are 3 components to it on a very high level. I'm going to go through each and every one of them. I'm thinking I'm going to invite questions, because we don't really know. I know some of you have really dug into this and have solutions and have thoughts. And so we might get, but I want to find the level of abstraction, or like the level of precision that we talk about these things in. So after each slide, I'll invite some questions if there's something, and then we'll see how deep we go. I think this is still sort of an orientation. This is still relatively high level, but nonetheless, I'd like to address your questions and curiosities. And then once we've gone through those 3, we'll do another little short reflection, short breakout, and harvest together before we close today's session. So what is the RCO? The 3 parts that I'm talking about or referring to is a source code. So that to us lives as you might be able to see from this icon, is that it has something to do with the horizon, some sort of direction setting. And then we are proposing that when we move into the RCO, we use 2 organizational forms. So in a way, we are again modeling on nature and creating some sort of opponent processing, or a dialectic, or a dialogue between 2 different organizational entities with 2 different operational logics. And then we're proposing a life cycle. Living systems, one of those definitions, the autopoiesis definition, is that a living system is a system that is constantly recreating itself and its boundary, and the fact its livingness lies in the ability to recreate itself and to acquire and have the resources that it needs to survive. So what happens if we introduce a life cycle into a company? And words that come with a life cycle is, at least for us that we've been thinking about it, are very radical words in a business context, like enough. What's enough? What's enough growth? Enough profit? All right, so let's move into the source code, and then we'll do the first sort of pause for questions. But the source code for us lives as the horizon. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this idea, this sort of core principle of the regenerative movement, which we also subscribe to, this Rainer Maria Rilke quote, which is "Live the questions." And so we're proposing that when you formulate your question, when you formulate what your RCO is about, you do that in an orienting question. And then as a follow-up, you might want to direct it a little bit more and be explicit about your purpose. So the question and the purpose is very, very central. The RCO, in a legal sense, is just a contract, a document that both of the organizations, or all of the organizational actual legal documents, like shareholder agreements, like bylaws, and things like that, point to. So the RCO is binding in the sense of a contract. What we're also proposing that you put in the RCO, in the source code, is the principles that you intend to follow, and also some key processes. But the RCO is overarching. It is supposed to be relevant for both the association, we'll come to that in the next slide, the association and the company. So needs to be able to be, there needs to be quite a bit of wiggle room in the source code. The source code is really just looking at the most essential aspects of what we're doing and setting the minimal possible direction and structure for what we need to have together. And everything else is going to then respond to context and be more fit for the actual thing that we're doing within these particular organizational forms. So that would be the source code. The source code is the first document. It's setting the horizon. It's the orienting question and the purpose, principle and key processes. And then I was going to just open up here. Nils, if you want to add something, or if someone else has a question or reflection.
Nothing to add from my side at the moment. Just inviting if anything is emerging in anyone before we move.
I think another thing that might want to be said from my side, this question that we're orienting towards, what initially when we did this, we weren't focusing on a question. But then we also realized that there were a lot of things that we were doing within our sphere of influence or so that didn't fit into the statement, the purpose statement that we had, or it was hard to link to. It required a lot of explanation. But when we formulated this as a question instead, it was easy for us to formulate a question that was very relevant to us right now, but that held a lot of different potentials, a lot of different potential pathways and paths towards different solutions. And so formulating it as a question is quite interesting. And it also creates an openness and also an engagement. It sparks imagination. So that idea or that aspect of formulating your purpose as a question has been much more powerful. It's a subtle shift, but it's a much more powerful shift than I would have personally first imagined. Nils?
Okay, so now I can add a word since you're saying that. What that has been bringing up for us and for me is a shift, at least in the way I've been experiencing the business world. The business world in my mind has been or is a lot about answers and solutions. Like, I've figured it out. I have the solution. This is the way to do it, or this is the product or the service or the thing that we're going to create. While what we're doing here with the focus on question is basically borrowing from the world of science, and where you are never done, and the question remains relevant, and you can form hypotheses, and you can form multiple hypotheses. And the perspective of living systems and the world of complexity and chaos, where it's most likely, if you ask me, that there isn't one solution to the pickle or the predicament that we're in. But it's an ongoing exploration where we actually move continuously in multiple directions. So in simple terms, it would be saying that we're applying the scientific method to a company, in a sense, by just simply shifting our focus to a question instead of a statement. Nanda, thank you.
Nice. So I'm moving us on into this part, which gets more technical, but nonetheless, here's the principle, the underlying principle that we're pulling from is, again, from living systems. So whether you talk about it in terms of right or left hemispheres, whether you talk about it in terms of opponent processing, or whether you talk about it in terms, but a lot of living systems seems to have a self-balancing aspect, if you will, a recursiveness to them. And we're saying that the limited company, it's a really powerful technology, as I was invoking to start with. It's this for-profit, the focused on parts, it's focused on project, and it's focused on experimenting for us then. In a way, it's focused on experimenting. You could argue that, but that's what we're proposing that would be. But the limited company, to use that incredible technology for channeling attention and resources into a project. And at the same time, keeping this limited company in relationship to the whole. So to try to work with this idea of the separation, that the separation is underlying a lot of the predicament that we are. It's not separate. There is a whole that we are referring to. We need someone to keep us, or something to keep us accountable to the whole. And there we have the association, which is not for profit, which is dealing mainly in relationships and dealing in purpose. The purpose is really at the core of the association. So what we're proposing is that we create these two entities, and these two entities are then connected with one another. And the nature of the connection is 10% of preferred shares. The preferred shares are, it gives the association right to 10% of dividends, 10% of any liquidation value, and those are fixed percentages. And then it also gives an indirect governance right for the association. So the proposition here is that the association appoints 50% of the board. And as you might know, when you are on a board, you are sitting there, at least in most of the Western world, you're there in your own capacities. You're there as an individual, and you also have an individual responsibility. So it's you as the individual. However you were elected to the board, you as the individual are serving the board. So it means that the association is basically half of the election committee for this company. And through that, it has an indirect power to influence positively what the company does. But that's a continuous discussion on the board between those that are appointed by the founders and by the investors, which would be the other half, and those that are appointed by the association. So you have this conversation that we are proposing between the non-profit logic and the for-profit logic, between the project that you have at hand and the purpose at large. That would be sort of replicated by these two organizational forms. Those that is also reflected and mirrored in the board. And then we are also there are two decisions in the decision catalog that are given where the association has a veto right. And that is for a change of purpose of the company. The association has to approve of such a thing, and it has to approve of new owners. Those are two veto rights that they have, so that those can't be negotiated away. And also, I would point out that because of the 10% preferred shares that they hold, the association is party in the shareholder agreement. That's what SHA stands for, shareholder agreement. And the shareholder agreement is an incredibly important document. And usually the shareholder agreement would not be transparent. It would not be public. Usually it would be hidden somewhere behind closed doors. But in this way, we're creating a visibility. Like, what are the actual conditions on the founders? What are the claims of investors and so forth on the founders for them to submit the money? And what are the terms by which they are investing? What is the actual deal between the founders and the investors? So that's transparent with the association as party of the shareholder agreement. I'll stop there. And else you want to clarify?
Minor addition is that the way we're seeing it, because it's a non-profit association, that means anyone can become a member. Any individual can be a member of that association, and that is partly what creates the transparency. So it means even if the company is not public, because there's a door in to the association, and that door leads to another door into all of the documentation and all of the information basically about the company that is available to shareholders. It becomes a transparent system. And so if you, as an individual, want to have a look inside or be a part of it, you can, even if you personally are not a shareholder or an employee or a partner or a client or anything like that of the private company. You can kind of step into the association and be part of it if you want to.
And then just opening the floor to questions or reflections or thoughts. think what might be worth saying here as well is that we're seeing there's quite a few versions of this these types of structures that are out there. I think a common one, which is very close in terms of shape, would be that where you have a foundation at the top, and then you have limited companies underneath that are doing the business part. I think what this particular proposal offers is more agility. And more agility actually comes at the cost of control. So the association, as Nils was pointing out, is a number of people that are together and doing things together. And they will actually have the possibility to redecide what they do. An association's purpose isn't fixed the way that a foundation's purpose is. And we are seeing that as a benefit. It's a feature, not a bug, so to say. Anton.
Yeah, I just got a question about like the process of, for example, starting a business, then like a limited company, for example. Would you then kind of try to find an association that aligns with what you want to achieve with your company, or do you create an association as well then when you create the business, for example, or how does that work?
You could do both, actually. That's a really good question. Thank you. You could do both. Either you can find an association that you, in a way, the company is employing the association to be accountable. It's asking the association, please hold us accountable for whatever it is that we're about to do, and make sure that we stay on purpose. And please also show us, like reveal to us the non-profit logic here. Like what is the ideal logic apart from the business logic that we are going to be focused on? So that's kind of the nature of the relationship. That's what we're hoping that would do. So you could very well step into an existing association. And the important thing for tax purposes, actually, is that when you form your company, before there are values in your company, you make an explicit commitment. And you can actually do that through quite a simple sort of just a write-up or a paper where you say, we founders, we intend to give or to sell at nominal value 10% of these shares. And we're doing that now before the company is worth anything, because there are restrictions for how we can shift shares around, so that otherwise it might trigger tax consequences. And the association might or might not, depending on, I guess, the nature of the association, but might or might not have the capital to pay, let's say, a fair price, or they might be then taxed for that. So it's important to just keep in mind the timing. But even we've been borrowing a lot from Hans Hassle's work on the compensation here, and he's proposing that you have an interim period. So if you start a new association, then you build the association in parallel with beginning the business, and then at an appropriate time, like when you have enough activities in the association so that they can really do their job of appointing the board, then you do the transfer of shares. And then you solve this tax hiccup by promising to sell the shares at the start. And that's been done in Sweden at a large scale before, successfully, without any issues. Any other questions?
I have another question.
Please.
What would you say is the main incentive for a business owner to choose this organization model? Is one, maybe I know you talked about it, but what would you say is like the main incentive for me? I'm gonna start a business. Why would I choose the RCO for me as a business owner? I get, the planet perspective, but why is it good for me? And the second question is, what is the preferred size of organization for something like this? Have you looked into, it's good if it's not above 50, or do you have a point of view on the size for it?
I'll start with the first one. That's easier. What we were perceiving when we were starting Innrwrks was that if we just did it has to do with the accountability thing. Like, who are we actually accountable to? who actually has say in the business. And then starting to think about in terms of advisory boards or like board members but there's something in our experience that happens when you start opening up your company, especially to investment. And then a lot of the attention kind of follows the money, because that is sort of the world of business. That's the currency of business. That is the language of business to a large degree. And so to counterbalance that in one way or another, we're proposing that you also sort of enshrine the ideal perspective here, and then part of it, and part of what we're seeing in terms of research on engagement and research on sort of purpose and research on like this whole Simon Sinek start with why and so forth. So something seems to happen with also the efficiency and the actual value creation in the company when you are related to a bigger whole, when you can actually see that founders are, and if you're as founders are really grounded in that and you can do it, you're not intending to take in on investment, then maybe you can just stay a limited company and not do this whole exercise with the association. But if you're intending scale, if you're intending owners and financial investors and so forth, it's very easy to get caught up in that conventional logic of just making more money. And there is very often a sort of a, what do you call it, like a mission drift or something like that, away from the purpose. So that would be, if you're purpose motivated, then trying to protect that in some way. That's kind of the core argument. Nils?
Yeah, and to add on top of the purpose protection, or safeguarding purpose over time, I would also say that because you can you open it up through the association, that means that anyone you run into, you can actually kind of invite in. So, okay, I can't hire you because I don't have the money for you, or you're not a fit for that. But if you're interested, you can actually kind of be part of it and step into this universe. So any individual, it's opening up for community, and there is potential benefit for the purpose expressed through that community. Because if I'm a community member, if I'm part of the association, and the association starts getting resources through the RCO model, which we'll speak to, I think, as well, then that actually opens up for more the drive, the ambition, the inspiration of more people to actually take shape into even more projects. If I am a member, there might be resources in the association that allows me to also do work in new ways, which is not the first company. So there's the community potential, and then there's also the potential where I think a lot of impact entrepreneurs or purpose-driven entrepreneurs have the experience that we're sensing that we're working towards the same thing, but in different companies, and it's not easy to kind of find a connection between companies, between entrepreneurial peers, so to speak. You have your company doing one thing, and I have my company doing a different thing, and to kind of streamline those energies and feel that we are different, but we're also together. And the RCO actually allows that, because we can connect all the companies to the same nonprofit association and still be different companies and still do different businesses and different things and have different teams. So there's a way of creating a community between founders of separate companies as well, where we're connected and we're actually putting resources into the center, all of us, and together kind of having a sense of working towards this shared horizon.
Yeah. Thank you. I think those are really good answers, because what I hear is that it allows for a business owner to stick to their core and what it is that they want to build with the company. Like I'm seeing it mostly impact-driven companies, but also other types of companies. But it also allows for flexibility and iterating on that core that you want to stick to. So thank you.
Yes. Well, I'm going to leave the other question for now, and Anna, let you in. Then we're going to move on.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for a really interesting model and presentation. I can really see a lot of positive effects with this. I was thinking about challenges, because I see like a lot of challenges with limited companies when it comes to wealth and power distribution, and really getting how the profit motive tends to sneak into all kinds of create all kinds of obstacles sort of for like big transformational change, and what your thoughts are on that, and for example this RCO compared to like more of a cooperative like ekonomisk förening, and like and how your thoughts go there.
Cool. Yeah, I'll bring that question with me into the next picture actually, because it is going to touch upon it, and we'll see. You will have to ask it again if we didn't touch it appropriately, sort of address it. But I think it will come here. So the third part of the RCO that I wanted to address is the life cycle, and so. This is very interesting because we've been thinking about this for a long time, and it felt a very extreme idea. And then, I mean, it's still a crazy level, but sort of even in the sort of OpenAI and Microsoft deal, there's actually a cap. Like that's quite extraordinary. That's a big shift from how we've been thinking about what companies are about. So maybe that kind of begins to touch upon your question, Anna. But if we look at the organization as a living system, then it's probably evolving explicit focuses of this organization as well. Like the focus of the organization might be different. The actual purpose of the organization might sort of shift a little bit between these different aspects. It might actually even relate to your question, Sabina, about size. What's the relevant size? But if we look at, it's healthy probably for an organization to grow at the beginning. It might be like a sprouting phase. You might want to grow until a certain point where you're actually, there's enough resilience, there's enough resources, there's enough, people in the organization so that you are actually fit for purpose, that you can do what you need to do, so to say. And then at that point, when you've grown enough, then maybe it's time for you to start complexifying, to really start looking at like, what's the nature of our efficiency? What does efficiency look like for us? So like some sort of maturation, like how do I deploy this unit now? Like where should our attention lie and so forth? There might be something like we've been playing with this idea of a kid, growing up, you need lots of attention from the parents. At some point you start like becoming more into yourself, and then maybe you need to find a new context, like for whatever reason, you might need to become part of like a bigger thing. If you're working on a technology as an RCO, then maybe that technology deployed, once you've taken it far enough, needs to live in a bigger context. So maybe there's succession. Maybe you sort of join a new family, so to say. And then the most radical notion is that what if companies needs to die as well? What if this thing that we're doing doesn't need to be done forever? There's no sort of intrinsic purpose in the thing that we're doing, but rather this thing could be done. Or maybe it's not done, but at some point the context has changed sufficiently so that we need to really reformulate what we're doing. So like maybe we do need to take it apart and start it again with the resources and the learnings, and the resources, I mean, both financial and let's say human and natural and whatever, all of the stuff that we have learned in sort of a multi-capital way. And so what we're proposing here is that you make that intention explicit to start with. And you say that, okay, so when we want to grow until this size, and that might be 50 people, it might be 50 million euros, it might be 500 million euros, or it might be 2 million euros for that matter. And then we want to try to do this. And there's a way here that I'm not going to go into right now, but there's a way here then to start also moving resources back towards the purpose. Our company's hypotheses then, to use Nils's language from the beginning, to answer this question is this. And at this particular size, we've probably proven that it works. And maybe instead of scaling our company up, we could replicate it or make it available as an open source model or something like that, so that it can replicate in other geographies. Or maybe there are other hypotheses that are necessary now for us to move towards that question that we're doing. Maybe we need to build another business and fund that. And there's a mechanism in the RCO to use the association as a funding vehicle for this ecosystem that could be evolving if we connect more organizations, more companies to the same association, if you will. And to speak directly to your question, and I think you can do a lot within an economic förening, like a corporate association structure. But I think investors, again, if your business or if your idea would be served by having investors in your company, then they're more used to investing in a company. So like there are dynamics like that and like there's also like a personality to a company. Like people that would work in a company might be different than the people that would work or would be engaged by a cooperative association, and vice versa, of course. So this is more like a way of taking the limited company in that logic. I've come from Stockholm School of Economics myself, and so that's sort of, I'm familiar with that. I'm comfortable there, and I would probably, that's where I start looking. Whereas like an association feels a little bit, less maybe familiar, and maybe it doesn't matter, but there's something around that in part of the answer. So I'll stop there, Nils, and other questions.
I'm not sure I have much to add beyond kind of the, once again, mimicking nature, imagining a meadow, perhaps, where a company is a plant and it grows into the size it wants to be, the size that it fits. If the meadow would follow the current business logic, then all the plants would try to grow as much as possible and become humongously big. And that probably does not create a healthy meadow. While on the meadow, the dandelion becomes the size of a dandelion and not an oak tree. So it kind of, this invites us to feel into what is kind of the right size, and when should energy start flowing back into the soil, and when should it be decaying with all the remaining energy flowing back into the soil, where the kind of overarching purpose is to keep the meadow going rather than to keep the dandelion going forever. So that just wanted to be shared as a, in other words, saying the same thing that Amit has already been speaking to.
Other questions, thoughts, reflections? Yep.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the evolving relationship with stakeholders?
Yeah. I mean, there's a way for us to say. So if we cap the return, so one of the things, and I'm gonna sort of make that explicit because I think that's still something that's challenging in the model, and we haven't fully cracked it. So just to be transparent about that, is this idea of liquidity, and so there are ways that we can kind of transform assets and so forth but an investor that's like dead set on a liquidity horizon. We still need to work that out a bit more. But what we would imagine here is that we start the company, and then we could go into, at the moment, I think a VC would be very challenging because of the institutional structure, but you could definitely talk to angels, and you can definitely have conversations with, let's say, family offices. Those investment classes are quite possible, and they would fund your venture with the idea, and this is also very similar actually to the Purpose Foundation's work, where you say like, okay, so you're going to be able to do 5x of your investment because we're going to be building this value. You're going to be able to do 10x of your investment. You're going to be able to do 100x of your investment. Like that's a discussion that you have, but it's a discussion that you have to have up front. It's not possible to say we're going to want as much as possible. So you in one way or another, we have to come to terms with and negotiate about what's enough here. And that would then characterize, that would set the limit for moving out of the sprouting phase and into the maturation phase. And then as we are maturing, there's a shift of ownership and governance towards the organization. Because at this point, the founders are still probably quite important, but not the most important people necessarily. The more and more so, the organization itself is going to have more to say and more something more sort of very relevant to say about its own existence and so forth. So there's a shift in the governance model that's proposed for the maturing, and there's also a redirection of the resources. So we are going to keep reinvesting our money back into the company to the extent that we need it, but any excess profits or so would also then start to be diverted into the association, so that we can again like build this ecosystem, saying that the company is going to be served by, and especially if it's an innovative company, by growing the cake, so to say. So like we can have growing the cake type activities, but instead of doing that within our company and diluting our focus, we could build separate companies that we have sharing and part in relationship to do that. And then in the decay phase, I would also say that there's an invitation for people to let go, and we've done. There's quite a bit of research on time limited foundations and ways of like where you actually don't just do the philanthropic thing of like saying that we're good and we're gonna give money, and so therefore we should be around forever and keep giving money, and so the endowment is untouched, and then you just give back money on the top of like you assume that you're going to be around forever. But rather, what if you actually set a really a time horizon, like if you really put down a death date, a date when you dissolve the whole thing, that seems to be a very interesting way of distributing resources back into, putting them back into flow. So there's something that could happen also in that end phase where you have a generative, and maybe some of the employees or some people that have been working for a long time in the company say, no, this is worth doing, but from our horizon, from this horizon, responding to this context, and then you release resources. So in a way, formally, employees wouldn't be considered, they're not shareholders as such, but they are definitely a stakeholder in the company, and they would then be empowered and resourced to maybe reinvent whatever we're doing then in the relevant context through their own framing and so forth. So there are these different, those are nuggets. Those are not complete answers, of course, to your question, but those are sort of some sprinkles. And now I'm looking at time. Yeah, go ahead.
So one more thing. Are you like proposing that like everyone could be stakeholders in the association, as Nils mentioned, that you create a community, like civil society, the state, like anyone could be part of it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and we're proposing in our initial draft. It depends on what you want to do, I think. But what we're proposing is that individuals, for Innrwrks, we have individuals as members of the association. So you individually pay your membership fee, full stop. But I mean, associations, if you look at industry associations, in a way, they are that, as well. You have companies, parts of associations, and you have lots of associations that are around for a number of different purposes. So you can actually design your association as you see fit. But in terms of this community forming aspect, is like there's a bit of a threshold. You have to pay a membership fee, and the association is about something. So the association is really driving the nonprofit agenda in this. So it would do, maybe it would do even research, but like initially it would do probably public awareness and communication and like, I don't know, maybe even like lobbying type activities for doing this stuff. So, yeah. We don't have time for the final reflection. I've let time, but it felt like it was important to kind of address the questions and so forth. And maybe I'll just close by, I should say this very, very briefly, but it is modular and adaptive. This is not a set fixed solution. It is more of a toolkit. And we've talked about this possibility of connecting multiple companies to the same purpose. It is actually quite well suited for purpose tokenization. So it's compatible with the whole DAO space that's emerging, although in a much more complicated legal structure. And it's adaptable in different jurisdictions. So that also just wanted to be said very briefly. And this was I'll send you with that question, what's shifted, if anything has shifted, or what's important. And we won't have time to do it right now, but I'll thank you very, very much for your attention. This was fun for me to talk about. I really liked the questions. And if you are curious about this, want to talk more deeply about it, get into the weeds and details, we are on this learning journey. So please reach out, and we can have a deeper discussion about your context and think together as a starting point. Is there something else, Nils, that we should be saying as a thank you?
I think the thank you is the most important, right? And that we will continue. There'll be more sessions. Keep an eye out if you're interested in it. Obviously, we'll be sharing the recordings.
Thanks a lot. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your lunch. If that's, yeah, Philip, I hope you had time to eat. And we will see you when we see you. And I'll send an email with the summary and the recording and stuff like that. Thanks a lot.
Super lovely. Thank you so much. Very interesting, guys. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yes.